Welcome back to the Veal Echo, where tonight we step into one of the most chilling mysteries that left even the FBI grasping for answers for more than 2 decades. Imagine a foggy small-town street in the late 1970s, the kind of place where silence feels heavier than sound. The lamps flicker above empty sidewalks, and somewhere in that darkness, a man in a trench coat walks alone, his figure swallowed by the mist. He doesn't know that this night will mark the beginning of a case that will haunt investigators for the next 26 years. It started with a discovery: a car left abandoned by the roadside. Its doors were wide open as though someone had left in a hurry. The glass on the driver's side window was shattered, glinting under the cold light of the moon. To the casual passerby, it might have looked like an accident, but for the agents who arrived that night, it was clear something far darker had taken place. Flashlights cut across the shadows as FBI investigators combed the scene. Every detail mattered: the damp soil, the disturbed gravel, even the faintest trace of footprints. But among the most haunting clues was a single blood-stained letter found inside. Its words were cryptic, the handwriting rushed, almost frantic. Candlelight later revealed the chilling phrases scrawled across the page, as though the writer was desperately trying to send a message from beyond. This wasn't just a case, it was the beginning of an obsession. The evidence was carefully logged and placed inside the FBI's storage vault, but one file stood out, stamped in bold red letters: Unsolved Case. Years would pass, yet this folder remained untouched, gathering more dust with each failed lead. Pinned to the corkboards inside the bureau were Polaroids of the victim, faded photographs surrounded by strings connecting fragments of information. Each string was a path that seemed to go nowhere. One by one, agents gave up, but a few refused to let it go. Picture an FBI profiler sitting in the haze of cigarette smoke, his eyes locked on that wall of evidence. The weight of unanswered questions hung around him like chains. Somewhere out there was the missing piece, the one clue that could unravel the truth. But in those early years, it seemed as if the shadows themselves were determined to keep their secret. And then, deep in the forest miles away from the town, stood a cabin. Its windows shattered, its walls rotting with age. Investigators who stumbled upon it described the place as if it had absorbed tragedy. Inside, the floor was littered with scattered photographs, old and yellowing, each one whispering fragments of a story no one fully understood. Overturned furniture, broken glass, and a silence so complete it felt alive. This was the first real glimpse into the nightmare that had begun on that foggy street. The vanishing in the shadows was more than a disappearance. It was the start of a trail of secrets, each darker than the last, and for the FBI it was only the beginning of a 26-year puzzle. The trail grew colder with every passing year, yet whispers of the mystery never disappeared. In the heart of the forest, where sunlight barely touched the ground, the abandoned cabin stood like a grave marker of forgotten truth. Its broken windows stared into the void, its wooden frame groaning under the weight of time. When agents returned to search it again, they found the inside in disarray: chairs overturned, drawers ripped open, and faded photographs strewn across the dusty floorboards. Each picture seemed to carry fragments of a life erased, faces blurred by age, expressions lost in time. But it wasn't just the cabin that held secrets. Not far from it, a river twisted through the landscape, dark and unforgiving under the pale glow of the moon. Locals whispered that it had swallowed more than its share of stories, and soon enough divers were sent into its depths. With flashlights slicing through the murky waters, they combed the riverbed for answers. What they pulled from the silt was not debris but a human skull, its hollow sockets staring back as though demanding justice. The discovery reignited the investigation. In a sterile forensic lab under the unforgiving glare of white lights, the skull was laid out on a metal table. Gloved hands turned it gently, examining fractures, analyzing every inch. For years, the Bureau had been chasing shadows, but here was something tangible, something that could speak if only science could unlock its silence. Yet even with this breakthrough, the case remained wrapped in uncertainty. One file, thicker than the rest, was pulled from storage, its cover stamped classified. Inside, page after page chronicled failed leads, suspect lists, and coded notes that seemed to vanish into contradictions. An agent, his face half lit by the dim glow of a desk lamp, studied it late into the night, eyes heavy with frustration. The Bureau itself grew divided. In tense boardroom meetings, agents argued, voices rising as papers slid across the table. Some insisted the case was a dead end, an endless spiral of unanswered questions. Others swore the truth was there, buried under years of overlooked evidence. But the louder the voices grew, the further the answers seemed to slip away. And so the investigation entered its darkest chapter. Down the long corridors of the FBI headquarters, only one or two agents still carried the burden, walking alone beneath flickering lights. To them, the silence was not closure, it was the echo of something waiting to be found. Then came an unexpected lead. a woman hidden in the shadows, clutching a small diary to her chest. In the flicker of candlelight, her eyes revealed both fear and knowledge. When the diary was finally opened, the pages spilled with disturbing sketches and coded writings, symbols and phrases that seemed less like confessions and more like desperate attempts to conceal a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. Each clue drew them deeper into the darkness, closer to a revelation that had been carefully buried for 26 long years. The silence was about to be broken. The diary unlocked doors that had been closed for decades, but what lay behind them was more sinister than anyone imagined. Hidden in its pages were sketches of locations, strange maps and notes that pointed investigators toward a crumbling building at the edge of town. Deep inside, buried beneath layers of dust and decay, stood a heavy iron safe. Its lock had long since rusted, but once pried open, it revealed a cache of documents no one was ever meant to see. Faded blueprints, photographs, and coded messages lay inside, each one tying the disappearance to a secret much larger than a single crime. The FBI moved quickly. Armed agents stormed a forgotten bunker in the dead of night, their flashlights piercing through the stale darkness. Every step echoed as though the walls themselves were reluctant to give up their secrets. What they found inside confirmed their worst fears: maps, pinned photographs, and a wall covered in strange symbols. This was not just a crime scene, it was a shrine to obsession, built by someone who had spent years orchestrating events from the shadows. As the investigation dug deeper, the trail led not to some faceless ghost of the past but to a man very much alive. He was old now, his face lined with the weight of years, yet his eyes still carried the haunted look of someone who had lived too long with secrets. Sitting alone in a dimly lit room, he seemed less like a suspect and more like a prisoner of his own past. Every word he spoke was laced with regret, yet his silence revealed far more than his confessions ever could. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to align. The skull recovered from the river, the scattered photographs in the cabin, the diary filled with codes, and the evidence from the bunker, all of it pointed to a single chilling truth. For 26 years, the answer had been buried not in the wilderness or the water, but within layers of deception carefully woven to keep investigators chasing shadows. Finally, after decades of frustration, the case cracked open. Agents held in their hands the evidence that ended the silence, the kind of breakthrough investigators dream of but rarely achieve. It was not triumph they felt, but relief. The victim whose voice had been silenced finally spoke through the fragments left behind, and the Bureau had no choice but to listen. And then came the final chapter of this haunting story. A gravestone stood quietly in the fog, its inscription worn by time. The air was heavy yet still, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. The FBI's long search was over, but the echoes of the case lingered, a reminder that even the deepest secrets cannot stay buried forever. The death that baffled the FBI for 26 years had finally surrendered its truth, proving that no matter how carefully darkness hides, the light will always find a way in.